I was living in a small town in Oklahoma with my mother at a small lake house, and I was probably 10 or 11 years old at the time. One night I was sleeping in my room when I randomly and abruptly woke up for no reason. This was not normal for me, and I felt very uneasy. The only sound I could hear was my mother snoring from the next room over on the couch. I rolled over and tried to go back to sleep, but my need to use the bathroom was growing more urgent, so I grudgingly forced myself to head that way. The bathroom was on the other side of the house, around a corner and past the kitchen, and finally down a long hallway on the right. So after I made the trip and finished my business, I flipped off the light switch and started heading back to bed. That's when I heard the distinct click of the light switch, and I saw the glow of the bathroom light in the hallway behind me where I had just finished up. Terrified, I slowly turned around just to witness the light in the bathroom start clicking on and off. Finally, it shut completely off. In the dark of the hallway, my eyes began to make out a white shape near the end of the hall. It was around my size and crouched on the floor. At this point, I was frozen to the spot as my mind began realizing that no one else had come home except for my mom and myself. Then the white shape began whispering in a quiet man's voice, "Help me, I'm lost." I remember wanting to scream for my mom, but I couldn't, and instead I barely said, "No." This thing then started running at me on what sounded like all fours. I quickly ran through the kitchen and around the corner before running to my sleeping mother, shaking her awake. I remember saying, it's coming," and my mother's eyes going from dazed to alert in an instant. She asked me what was going on, and I saw her eyes look over my shoulder before she screamed. Remembering her scream still makes my blood run cold. Never had I heard pure terror like that in my life, even to this day. She grabbed me by the arms and pulled me into my room and slammed the door. She held me in her arms with her back pressed against the door as we listened. It sounded like this thing was running around in circles in the kitchen. We could hear hands and feet slapping against the tiles. The kitchen had a sliding glass door to the outside, which sounded like it was thrown open and then slammed. We sat there horrified until daybreak. I was sent to my grandmother's in the next town over for a while after that and never set foot in that house again. Years later, my mother told me that the next day she went walking around the property after the incident. When she did, she came across a small burial site that was heavily overgrown, and 3 headstones that each belonged to children from the early 1900s. Upon some research, my mother found that this was our small town's first original cemetery, which only had a few people recorded to be buried there, and had been forgotten and partially sunken into the earth. It freaks me out, because what I heard that night was a man's voice, but it was so unnatural. My mom still will not tell me what she saw behind me, and what it was that made her scream. At this point, I'm not quite certain what to make of this, but it was most certainly one of the more eerie things that I've ever experienced over the last couple of years. At the time of the encounter, I was visiting my grandfather in a dusty, dying small town somewhere out in the northwestern part of Texas. The town in question is one of those old-fashioned places where everyone knows everyone. All you really need to know about the town is that due to the recent abandonment by petrol companies, it's been on a steady decline towards desertion. The only people left are either old folks bent on going down with their ship, or people who simply cannot afford to live anywhere else. The story begins deep in the dead of night. I'm not fully certain what time it was, but it was late. I was the last person in the house who was still awake. I spent the weekend-long trip committing to on and off photography shoots around town. I was interested in documenting the rusted remnants of a once prosperous town. Knowing that the sky would likely be brilliantly lit so far from any major cities, I figured I'd step out onto the porch and see if I could get a few decent shots. I wasn't even 5 seconds into my photo shoot before a relatively junky-looking car came screeching down the road with its headlights on and music blaring. The house isn't too far from a corner, so unsurprisingly the car came to a stop at the cross street. This is where it gets odd. Rather than yielding and then resuming its route after a short stop, the car stayed in place and the driver turned off their headlights. I just continued to take pictures while the car just sat there with the music blaring and the headlights off. It took a minute to register, but I began to feel watched. So, a bit confused and somewhat worried, I rushed back into the house. Immediately after I closed the door, the headlights to the car came back on, and it went screeching off. After I left home for my city, my grandpa notified me that he had seen people in cars watching and keeping tabs on his house at all hours of the day. I'm well aware that the drug trade is somewhat prevalent in this town, but perhaps this was unrelated. I'm wondering if that was something I missed. I didn't hear anyone get out of the car after I went back inside. My best guess is that they saw me taking pictures out there in the dead of night and suspected that I was onto them. If so, should I be worried about having accidentally put my grandfather's house on their radar? Or maybe I might be overthinking the whole encounter. I head back to visit my grandfather often, so maybe I will learn more, or ideally not see that car again when I'm visiting. It was 8:30 p.m. on a Sunday night. I was getting back from a road trip with my boyfriend. We had just reached my home state and my car was almost out of gas. We were on the freeway driving through a boring stretch of my state that's mainly cornfields, little neighborhoods, and the occasional store. We Google mapped a gas station that was seemingly right off the freeway. Now, it was dark outside. It was kind of stormy all day, but at that time it was only just a bit windy with some sprinkles here and there. We pulled off an exit that I've never been to before. The gas station was farther than it seemed on Google Maps, and I was getting really close to completely running out of gas. We drove for about 5 minutes on long stretches of roads, passing a church, some houses, but mainly empty land. We got to the hub of the small town, and I'm not even sure what city we were in. I saw a gas station up ahead, but it was not the one that we had Google mapped. I had to stop though. I had no choice because I would not have made it to the other gas station. This was a small town that had one intersection. We passed some side streets that had a little neighborhood. We did not see a single car or people walking. Pulling up to the town portion, it was creepy. The town had old buildings and 1 or 2 streetlights. We pulled up to the gas station. It was a small gas station with 4 gas pumps. All the lights illuminating the pumps were flickering. I immediately got the creeps, but I could not go any further without getting gas. I stepped out of my car and put my card in the gas pump. The pump ordered me to go inside to get the attendant to pay for gas. I walked inside, and there were only the attendant and a woman buying a birthday card. She was shuffling at the counter, finishing the transaction. The woman greeted me, but the attendant did not. While waiting, I suddenly heard very loud sirens, like tornado sirens, starting to go off. I started looking outside. It was a bit windy, but not gale force winds. I tried looking in the sky, but I couldn't see anything. I looked over at the 2 people in the gas station to take directions from them on where to hide or what to do. They had no reactions. The woman said something about how annoying it would be to live near the sirens, and the attendant agreed. She said bye to me for some reason and walked out. I wanted to panic with the siren still going off, but I didn't know what it was. While finishing the transaction, I asked the attendant what it was for. He looked like I had 4 heads and said, "An emergency." He was eerily calm, with no reaction to the supposed emergency. I walked outside and got my gas, and the sirens were still going off. I kept waiting to hear emergency sirens, like ambulances or police, but heard nothing. I did not see a single car drive by or a single person walking or anything. It was eerie, because the sirens were going off essentially right next door, so I logically should have seen some sort of emergency vehicles. I know small towns test their sirens once a month, but that late at night didn't make sense to me. I got in my car, my boyfriend asked what it was, and I just said nothing and then sped off towards the freeway. I could not find out why it was so eerie, but I haven't been able to get it out of my head. I was a truck driver for years and have a few creepy stories from my times on the road. But one that sticks out is something that happened a long time ago, back in the late 1990s. I was driving a semi-truck across the country on another long trip. I don't even remember exactly what state I was in, but it was nighttime and I was on a quiet highway. With it being pretty late at night, there were not many other cars on the road. It was a typical 2-lane highway with mostly woods and wildlands surrounding me on both sides. Occasionally, I would pass by an exit that would lead to a small town or a truck stop. I was going to be driving for several more hours though before I would stop. Back then, the hours would be crazy for me at times. So as I was driving, I remember that a few cars came up behind me. It was weird because I remember thinking that it had been so quiet, and now there was suddenly not 1, not 2, but 3 cars approaching. But overall, it seemed to just be a random coincidence to me. As I was in the right lane, one of the cars went into the left lane to pass me. The car then got into the right lane in front of me once it had passed. At this same time, another one of the cars went into the left lane to pass. But the car that passed me and was now in front of me started slowing down. This annoyed me because now I had to slow down. I had been going maybe 65 miles per hour, and now I had to slow down to like 55. But it didn't stop there. The car continued to go slower. I could see that it was braking. There was nothing up ahead on the road that would cause us to slow down. The road was completely straight, and there was no cop car on the side of the road waiting for speeders, no animals crossing the road, nothing. But the other weird thing was that the car in the left lane that was about even with me did not speed up. That car was slowing down with us as well. Meanwhile, the other car behind me was not even bothering to pass. It was like these cars were all boxing me in. There was nothing I could do unless I wanted to run over the car in front of me. We went slower and slower. These cars all around me were just regular-looking sedans. We were slowing and coming to a stop, and I pulled over to the side of the road wondering what was going on. When I stopped, all 3 cars that were around me stopped as well. I had a bad feeling about it. The one car that had been next to me pulled over in front of me next to the other car, and the car behind me pulled over right behind me. Then I saw the front doors to the 2 cars in front of me open. A man got out of each one. Both of the guys were wearing dark clothing and also had winter hats on. They instantly started speed walking over to me. One guy went to each side of my cab. Without saying a word, they both tried opening my doors, but they were locked. Then the guys started banging on the windows and doors. I really didn't know what they wanted, but this was no way to approach me. I yelled at them to leave me alone, but obviously they did not care. When they continued to try to get in and bang on the windows and stuff, they left me no choice. I put my truck into gear and started driving forwards. Obviously, my truck took a little bit to get going, but it was very powerful. Much more than these little cars that the men were driving. I went forward and ran into one of the cars. As I got going, I pushed the car forward and out of the way. I also scraped the other car that was parked next to it, but I didn't care. The men stayed at my cab for the first few seconds as we got going. Then they jumped off, and one of the guys ran to his car, and the other had to stay out of the way. After I ran into the cars and they were pushed to the side, I just kept driving and went even faster. 2 of the guys got back in their cars and drove right up next to me again. The other guy couldn't get up to speed with the damage on his car. They tried doing the same thing to me, but I kept going at my pace. When the guy in front of me slowed down, I simply ran into him. Then he moved to my left and tried to run me off the road. He swerved right in front of me, but I didn't move. He briefly hit me and then backed away, realizing that his car was no match for my large truck. Then all the cars slowed down and were quickly out of my sight. I wasn't even going that fast. I continued driving until I made it to the next truck stop. Then I called the cops from there and had to report the incident to my boss as well. The truck wasn't damaged too bad, thankfully. I never found out if the cops located any of those guys, and I don't know what would have happened had I opened the doors for them. Many years ago, I worked at a Toys R Us for a while. I was part-time and would mostly work on nights and weekends. This was way back in 2003, so many things from my time working there I have forgot. However, one memory sticks out as something that I will never forget. The Toys R Us store that I worked at was a little bit smaller, but it was the closest one to me. I remember that I had been working there for several months when this happened. We had a break room where I would take all my breaks in. Most nights when it was time for my break, I would be the only person in there. Sometimes if it was the weekend, or just randomly here and there, I would not be, and there would be other people in there with me. But typically I was. I would just hang out in there and watch the TV, or eat, or read. So one time, I was on my break in the break room, and there was suddenly a loud knocking on the break room door. I would always close it because we were supposed to. In the far back of the store, there was a hallway where the restrooms were. A little bit farther down that hallway and to the right was the break room. I figured it to be a coworker, but I didn't know why they were bothering me on my break. I got up and went over to the door and opened it, but nobody was there. It seemed like a weird thing, and I just went back with my break. There were no more knocks that time after that. I don't remember exactly when the next time it happened was, probably a few days later. But once again, I was in the break room by myself, and there was knocking on the door again. When I got up to look, whoever did it was gone. This time though, just minutes later after I had sat back down, they knocked again. Once more, they were nowhere to be found. And this happened again at least 2 more times over the next week or so. It wasn't every break I took, and it wasn't every time that I worked, but it was happening multiple times a week, sometimes multiple times at night. I was annoyed and wondering who was doing this to me and why. I asked several coworkers if they knew anything, but none of them did. However, after it happened once more, I got so fed up that I decided to take my next break in my car. So the next time that I worked, when it was time for my break, I left the store and was sitting out in my car in the parking lot. It was a night shift, and I remember that things were not too busy. I thought I was finally going to take a break with some peace. Sometime into it though, I sat in my car eating an apple, when suddenly I heard a loud noise behind me. Somebody started banging on the back passenger side door to my car. It was incredibly startling because I had not expected it at all. I turned around and looked to just barely see somebody running away and ducking behind the back of my car. I could not tell at all who it was, but now they were right behind my vehicle. So because of that, I decided to drive away. I put my car into drive and just left. As I was leaving, this gave the person no place to hide. When I looked behind me, I saw a man sprinting away and hide behind another nearby car. I couldn't see his face, but I could see that he had a basic build, and I could see what he was wearing. I just drove a short ways away, but then returned back to the Toys R Us to continue my shift. I went inside when my break was over and told my manager, but I figured that whoever had done it was long gone. Then I continued working my shift. Later on, when I was still working that night, only like 30 minutes after that, I saw someone. There was a man inside the store, and he was standing kind of far away, but he was wearing the same thing that the person who had knocked on my car was wearing. Could this be the guy? I kept looking at him. He started walking a little bit closer, and then he noticed me. He looked at me and then turned around and left the store. That seemed really suspicious to me, and it made me think that it was him. I hoped that he wouldn't come back, but he didn't stay away. It was probably my very next shift, and I took my break, this time in the break room again. I really didn't think the guy would return, but sometime into my break there was another loud knock at the door. Literally the instant I heard it, I jumped up and ran over to the door. I opened it and then ran into the back of the store. When I did, I saw the same guy. He was running away still. I continued after him and then yelled at him. He eventually stopped and acted confused. I yelled at him for a good minute, and then he turned and walked out of the store. After that, he never came back. I'm not sure why he was messing with me like that, but after I caught him red-handed, he seemed to stop.